Here's one of those games I wanted as soon as I saw the cover art. Interstate 76, released in 1997 by Activision for Windows 95 PCs. This was one of the premier vehicular combat games released at a time when it seemed like there was a new one of these kind of games coming out every other month. But just looking at this box over and over in Best Buy back then was enough to permanently embed it in my mind, with its promises of exploding muscle cars and characters with polygons proudly on display. Inside the box, you get some ads for other Activision products, a handy reference card for the control layout, and a substantial manual that's fashioned after the kind you'd get with a new car, covering everything it needs to, with a few extra things like character bios and whatnot. Then there's the game itself on 2 CD-ROMs, at least with this original release. There was also an upgraded gold release later, which was then re-released in the Interstate 76 Arsenal box set, alongside the standalone expansion, the Nitro Pack. Nitro added new cars, weapons, missions, and online racing modes, but it's still the same basic gameplay, just with new tidbits and minus any narrative tying it together, and because of that we'll primarily be looking at the base game. First things first, Interstate 76 has an awesome installation process, mimicking the sounds of browsing through radio stations and setting the stage for the game's story.
In keeping with the spirit of 76, 400,000 pounds of red, white, and blue paper mache has been...
Once it's installed, you then choose your graphics card rendering mode while listening to some prime Funkadelia. Normally I'd choose 3DFX Glide mode since I'm playing this using a Voodoo 3 card, but I was getting some major texture mapping glitches and had to use Direct 3D rendering instead, so that's what you'll be seeing. Anyway, once that's sorted out, you're shown one of the longest intro videos around. This 5-minute cutscene is like watching the opening act of a 1970s crime drama, just with people that don't have any real discernible facial features beyond excellent mustaches. And it's worth mentioning the soundtrack right away because it is phenomenal. Soul, funk, disco, and all sorts of groovy Red Book audio tunes fill the CD, with people like Santana keyboardist Tom Coaster and Third Eye Blind bassist Arian Salazar performing and writing each of the increasingly excellent tracks. Once that epic intro is finished, it's on to the main menu, where you can play a short tutorial, begin the story mode, or play multiplayer, either online or against AI opponents. And since multiplayer features mostly the same gameplay, well, let's just dive right into the story mode so you can see what it plays like. Interstate 76 takes place in 1976, appropriately enough, in a world where the 1973 oil crisis only got worse. This has led to a Mad Max-style dystopia where most everyone has strapped weapons to their vehicles and goes out killing people in the search for gasoline. You play the role of Groove Champion. Yes, really. On his mission to avenge the death of his sister Jade, who we saw get shot in the opening cinematic. And it turns out that she was a vigilante, which in this case is a citizen that took up arms against the gasoline raiders known as Creepers and the corrupt police forces that roam the highways. So Groove becomes a vigilante as well, and it turns out that he's just a natural at it, because plot. So that's the basic story, but the other big appeal of I-76, though, is the car combat. Not only because vehicular violence is a lot of fun, but because the structure of this particular game remains quite unique to this day. You could think of this as an automotive game of MechWarrior, but instead of mechs you have armored muscle cars, and instead of military radio chatter you have smack talk and swearing.
Watch that shit, cowboy!
And this comparison makes more sense than you might realize, seeing as it uses the same engine as MechWarrior 2, as well as being designed, written, and directed by many of the same team members. Each mission, or scene as it's called here, gives you a waypoint to reach and a task to perform once you arrive, like blowing something up or intercepting an enemy. Sometimes you'll have help from a partner, other times you're going at it alone, but no matter what, you have some leeway in how you complete your objectives. Once you've completed them, you'll head back to headquarters and sort through any salvaged parts from the vehicles you took down. And these parts can be repaired and used as upgrades, and of course you'll have to repair your own vehicle before heading back out, so keeping a few spares on hand is a good idea. You can also adjust armor and chassis strength from a preset number of points, which becomes a necessity in later levels against certain enemies. And that's the basic gist of it. There are 17 scenes from the main story to complete, following Groove on his path from basic revenge all the way up to undermining a sinister plot involving government corruption and nuclear weapons. And you know what? The whole thing is still absolutely captivating. The characters of Groove, your mechanic Skeeter, and your partner Taurus are all just super memorable. I love this stuff. Anytime something happens to them, I feel instantly invested in the upcoming mission, and I'm committed to seeing the whole thing through all the way to the end, in a way that the MechWarrior games rarely ever pulled off for me. There's a sense of camaraderie that makes I-76 stand out, with everything from the overarching narrative to little touches like the poetry button. Yes, there's a keyboard command dedicated strictly to asking Taurus to recite poems.
Hey Stampede, how about a poem?
It's a high-pitched sound. Hot rubber eternally pressing against the blackened pavement. A will is forever. A car is infinity times 4.
Yeah, I like that, man.
Stuff like this goes a long way in making a game feel unique, and that's great, but it gets better. I haven't even gotten to the combat yet. Again, it's a lot like a mech game in the sense that you have a set of hard points on your vehicle, which can be linked together, shot individually, and disabled by opponents if you're not careful. Each major component of your vehicle can be disabled, actually, and if the wrong part is shot off, it can end a mission dead in its tracks, seeing as several of these rely on you doing things like pulling off stunts to proceed, and if your car is screwed up, that ain't gonna happen. And the AI doesn't play nice at all, even on the easiest difficulty, so you'll want every machine gun, rocket launcher, turret, landmine, oil slick, mortar launcher, and flamethrower you can get. Each one is not only destructible, but they have a limited amount of ammo as well. There are no recharging energy weapons here because, hey, this is still 1976, even if it's an alternative one. At least you can gain special abilities like nitrous oxide, radar jammers, and chassis enhancements from scrapping down enemies. That makes things a little better. And you also have a map and list of things to follow, but again, being the 70s, this is just a compass, a paper map, and a notepad. And finally, you can shoot your pistol from the driver's seat when things get really desperate. But good luck taking down an armored helicopter like that. As for actually using all this stuff, it's all up to your own skill as a driver to make it happen, and of course learning when to use each system and when. And the missions have some real variety too. You've even got stealth areas where you have to turn off your engine and coast right by turrets, so it's always keeping you engaged by having you try new things. And barring a few exceptions, it works quite smoothly. It can be difficult to judge what terrain will ruin your day or not, largely because of how it's rendered. There's an awful lot of object pop-in going on level of detail stuff that even on the highest settings doesn't go away, so if you go off-road, it's a huge risk sometimes, especially since anytime your car flips over on its roof, it's an instant game over. And the camera also leaves something to be desired, with the view either being obscured or the camera bouncing around so much that it makes your eyes strain to see ahead. Still, overall, the combat is pretty freaking solid for a game of its time, and it's a whole lot better than the alternatives on PC back then. You know, games like Streets of SimCity, which actually shares quite a bit in common in terms of genre and 70s theme. But for all the novel elements that game had, and I still have a soft spot for it, Interstate 76 and Streets of SimCity are two games that couldn't be farther apart in terms of how downright playable they still are. I-76 is just a ton of fun to play through even today, and I'd still highly recommend it if you can get it running properly. And that's a big if, as it's notorious for performance and physics issues on modern hardware. Even with that digital re-release on GOG, it still just doesn't work right. You can patch that up and tweak some files for compatibility, but it still doesn't play quite as it should in my experience. But once you do find its groove and everything's going nicely, Interstate 76 is well worth it for the story it tells, the carnage you take part in, the terrific soundtrack, and of course, the poetry.
Across white space to the frozen shore, I see through curls and eddies of falling snow the once green field, and a birthday on the grass, a party for 3 in the Boston sun, all now covered with snow.
Wow.
If you enjoyed this episode, why not check out some of my others? And sometime in the future, I hope to cover the sequel Interstate 82 and the spin-off Vigilante 8, so stay tuned or subscribe if you so desire. And as always, thank you very much for watching LGR.